Just 1 week ago, on October 6, 2025, the United States Supreme Court delivered a decision that sent shockwaves across the globe. The ruling was not just another legal decision, it was a seismic event that has already begun to reshape the landscape of international trade. In a landmark 6-3 ruling, the court struck down the steel and aluminum tariffs first imposed by former President Donald Trump in 2018. These tariffs had been a cornerstone of his trade policy, aimed at protecting American industries, but criticized for igniting trade wars. This wasn't just a tweak to trade policy, it was a fundamental re-evaluation of presidential power, abruptly ending a years-long trade dispute that had strained America's alliances and global supply chains. The decision has been hailed by some as a victory for free trade and criticized by others as a blow to national security. The decision immediately invalidated the tariffs, creating a new and uncertain landscape for businesses and governments worldwide. Companies that had adapted to the tariffs now face a new set of challenges and opportunities as they navigate this uncharted territory. The ruling represents one of the most significant curbs on executive authority in decades, setting a precedent that will shape how future presidents approach trade and national security. Legal experts are already debating the long-term implications of this decision. As the dust settles, the world is watching to see what comes next for the global economy. Will this lead to a new era of cooperation, or will it spark further conflicts? Only time will tell. To truly grasp the Supreme Court's recent decision, we need to rewind to 2018, a pivotal year for U.S. trade policy and global economic relations. That year, President Trump shocked both allies and rivals by imposing a 25% tariff on imported steel and a 10% tariff on imported aluminum, citing concerns that foreign metals threaten the backbone of American industry. The administration justified these sweeping tariffs under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, a rarely used law that allows the president to restrict imports if they are deemed a threat to national security. This marked a dramatic expansion of executive authority in trade matters. Unlike his predecessors, Trump invoked this law not just against traditional adversaries, but also against some of America's closest allies, including Canada, the European Union, and Mexico. The move sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles and upended decades of established trade relationships. The response was swift and fierce. U.S. allies rejected the national security rationale, calling it a pretext for economic protectionism. Many retaliated with their own tariffs on American products, from bourbon to motorcycles, escalating tensions and igniting a global trade dispute. This tit-for-tat escalation quickly spiraled into a trade war, driving up costs for American manufacturers who relied on imported materials, and ultimately raising prices for everyday consumers. The uncertainty rattled markets and forced businesses to rethink supply chains. Even after President Trump left office, most of these tariffs remained in place, continuing to weigh heavily on American businesses, especially small manufacturers. The ongoing trade tensions also strained relationships with key allies, complicating efforts to build international coalitions. Frustrated by the economic fallout, a coalition of businesses and industry groups banded together to challenge the legality of the tariffs. They argued that the president had overstepped his authority, and their case eventually made its way to the highest court in the land. Now, the Supreme Court faced a critical question. Just how far does presidential power extend when it comes to shaping the nation's trade policy in the name of national security? The Supreme Court's decision in this landmark case hinged on the separation of powers, a core constitutional principle that ensures no single branch of government becomes too powerful. This foundational idea is woven into the very fabric of American democracy, shaping how laws are made and enforced. The majority opinion, written by Chief Justice Roberts, invoked the non-delegation doctrine, a rarely used but powerful legal concept. This doctrine holds that Congress cannot simply hand over its legislative authority to the executive branch without providing clear and specific guidelines. In other words, Congress must carefully define the limits and scope of any power it delegates, especially when it comes to matters as significant as trade policy and national security. The court found that the administration's use of Section 232 gave the president almost unchecked authority to define what counts as national security and to impose tariffs at will, without meaningful oversight or direction from Congress. This, the justices ruled, effectively allowed the executive branch to create trade laws and taxes, powers that the Constitution reserves for Congress alone, not the president. The dissenting justices, however, argued that the president needs broad flexibility to respond quickly to national security threats, especially in a rapidly changing world where new risks can emerge overnight. But the majority insisted that, while flexibility is important, Congress must set the rules and provide clear boundaries to prevent abuse of power. The ruling reasserted Congress's role as the primary lawmaker, sending a clear message to future administrations and lawmakers alike. The president's power to act on trade, the court declared, must have limits and be subject to meaningful oversight, especially when those actions can impact the entire economy. This decision marks a significant turning point in how America balances the need for swift executive action with the constitutional requirement for checks and balances, ensuring that no branch can act without accountability. The Supreme Court's decision sent shockwaves through global financial markets. U.S. steel and aluminum producers, long shielded by tariffs, saw their stock prices plunge as investors feared new competition from cheaper imports. Meanwhile, manufacturers that rely on these metals, car makers, appliance makers, construction firms, welcomed the ruling, anticipating lower costs and higher profits. Internationally, foreign steel and aluminum producers surged on news they could re-enter the U.S. market. The U.S. dollar fluctuated as traders recalibrated for a post-tariff world. Companies scrambled to adjust supply chains, seeking new suppliers and renegotiating contracts. The decision exposed deep divisions in the American economy over protectionism versus free trade. Globally, the ruling triggered a period of adjustment as industries realigned to the new rules. The world's manufacturing ecosystem began to shift, bracing for both challenges and opportunities. The Supreme Court's ruling ignited fierce debate in Washington. President Biden responded with a measured statement, pledging to work with Congress on new, constitutionally sound trade tools. Former President Trump condemned the decision, calling it a blow to American sovereignty and his America First agenda. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers from both parties agreed the legal framework for trade needed urgent reform, but disagreed on the path forward. The ruling forced Congress to confront its own role in trade policy, reigniting debate over the balance of power between the branches of government. This conversation will shape U.S. politics and trade for years to come. America's trading partners, especially the EU, Canada, and Mexico, welcomed the Supreme Court's decision as a victory for the rules-based order. These countries quickly announced plans to lift retaliatory tariffs, offering relief to American exporters and farmers. The end of tit-for-tat measures opened the door for renewed cooperation and diplomatic repair. The ruling was seen as a repudiation of using national security as a pretext against allies. Still, foreign leaders remain cautious, knowing protectionist sentiment persists in the U.S. and that Congress could craft new, more targeted trade laws. The world is watching Washington closely, waiting to see what new framework will emerge. The decision is a chance to rebuild trust. But the future of global trade remains uncertain. The Supreme Court's ruling has redrawn the boundaries of American trade policy. Presidents can no longer unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs by citing vague national security threats. Now, any significant trade action will require explicit congressional approval, putting pressure on lawmakers to rewrite the rules. The coming legislative battle will define the balance of power on trade for a generation. This shift could make U.S. trade policy less nimble but more stable, as agreements backed by Congress are harder to reverse. International partners may find U.S. commitments more reliable, reducing global uncertainty. Ultimately, America must decide, is trade policy a tool for prosperity or a weapon for protection? The answer will shape the nation's economic destiny. As of October 13, 2025, the global economy enters a new chapter. The Supreme Court's decision has de-escalated trade tensions and reopened diplomatic channels, promising a more stable trading environment. But the future is unwritten. Congress must now decide whether to embrace multilateralism or craft new protectionist tools. Domestic pressures over jobs and competition remain strong, ensuring a heated legislative debate. This episode is a reminder that U.S. legal decisions can reshape economies worldwide. The hope is for renewed international cooperation to tackle deeper trade challenges together. The end of the tariffs is just the beginning. The choices made now will determine if the world moves toward resilience and prosperity, or back to conflict. The next steps in Washington will set the course for the global economy's future.